Hey y'all, Lila here with Miss Kiss Creations. Welcome back to my channel. Today's Tumbler tutorial, I'm going to show you how I created this beautiful glittered peekaboo heart tumbler. Yes, I know that's a mouthful, but it's such a beautiful tumbler. And like always, all of my materials will be listed in my description below, including some direct links and coupon codes. And don't forget, you can find me on all of my socials, obviously YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with this tutorial. The tumbler that I'm using is actually a tumbler that I've had for about a year in my craft room. I spray painted this tumbler red. I applied some Mod Podge, and then I applied my glitter using the Mod Podge method, and then I epoxied over this 30-ounce tumbler 2 times. I used 20 milliliters of epoxy for the first coat, and the second coat I use about 15 milliliters of epoxy, and the glitter I use is Queen of Hearts. So all this is a glitter tumbler that has been epoxied over, and it's cured and it's ready to go for the next steps. And just like every other tumbler, every time I epoxy a tumbler, I make sure to use my X-Acto knife and I clean up the rim of my tumbler with that X-Acto knife. And then once I'm finished with cleaning up the rim, I'm then going to take my 91% alcohol to remove any like oils that may have been placed on the tumbler or anything like that. I did not really sand this tumbler too much after I applied that last coat of epoxy. I noticed that I did have a lot of bumps in it, but I didn't want to sand away that glitter, so I just left those bumps the way it was. I tried to sand it and I didn't really like it, so I just left it how it was. Now this tumbler is going to be a peekaboo tumbler, so I am going to be placing some vinyl on this tumbler to create my templates or peekaboos. I am using any color vinyl. The only thing that I would say that you need with this vinyl is make sure this vinyl is temporary, make sure it isn't permanent, because you are going to be removing these pieces later. I do have this design on my Etsy shop. I will post that in my description below. I have the hearts on my Etsy shop, and then I also have the love on my Etsy shop, and it's one file. So all I'm doing now is I cut out my design that's on my Etsy, and then I am going to add the inside of that design or the silhouettes of the hearts. I'm not adding the outlines, I'm adding the silhouettes because this is going to act as that peekaboo. So everything underneath those hearts, that red glitter is going to show. And again, I am using a temporary or 631 vinyl just so I can remove the vinyl easily whenever I'm finished. And then I'm adding a little space just to keep bare so I can add that love decal at the end. Now I'm taking some painter's tape and I curl this painter's tape up into like little balls, and then I apply that on every single heart. The reason for that is so I know where the decals are placed after I apply my glitter over this design. I know a lot of people use hot glue, but I'm not a fan of that because it gets really stringy. So if you do want to use hot glue, you just put little dots of hot glue on these decals or vinyls, and then you're able to peel it up. Another reason why I don't like using hot glue is because when I add the hot glue, it really gets stuck to the tumbler and it's really hard peeling up that print or that decal. So for me, just peeling or curling these little blue pieces of tape up and applying it very carefully on all these hearts, I know it takes a lot more time, but in the end, it's easier to peel up these pieces of vinyl when I'm finished applying that glitter and having to actually create that peekaboo effect. And once I'm finished with that, we're just going to go right into adding that glitter over this entire tumbler. I am choosing like a pinkish glitter. Really have fun with this. You don't have to do all one color. I just made this for beginners, so I chose to do just one color on the bottom and then one color on the top. But if you're more of an advanced tumbler creator, change it up some. Use a couple colors on the top, use a couple colors on the bottom, and really have fun with this tumbler. Now that my tumbler is ready to go, I'm going to add my glitter using my acrylic paint. I'm using Apple Barrel Cameo Pink, and I mix that with Mod Podge. It does not matter which finish of paint you have. And then I have my True Love from Glitter Heart Co. This is a nice pink that I think will go really beautiful with that red. All I do is I add my Mod Podge and my acrylic paint to my painter's tray. I make sure to add more Mod Podge than the paint, and then I mix that with a popsicle stick until it's one color. I apply all my paints using a Wet n Wild makeup brush. That will be linked in my description below. They're like $1 to $1.10 each from on Amazon, Walmart, and Target. This is great whenever you're applying any type of paint. I know it's a makeup brush, but it just works wonders. So all I do is I dip that inside of my tray, and then I add that paint all over my tumbler. I'm not worried if that paint goes over those decals, that vinyl. Just make this one solid color on your entire tumbler. It's a lot easier doing it this way than trying to work around those heart decals. And when trying to find your adhesive color, like your acrylic paint color, don't overthink that. I rarely have like the same color acrylic paint or undercolor that I have as a glitter, if that makes sense. I use whichever shade of pink I have on hand. This just happens to be like a really close color, and you can always make your own color by mixing paints. So once I have that paint on my tumbler, while that paint is still wet, I'm going to apply that glitter all over my tumbler. I'm not going to worry if that glitter gets on those hearts or that tape. I'd rather do it this way than try to work around those hearts, because I wanted a nice, clean, like crisp heart whenever I pick up that excess vinyl. And just make sure you have a fully covered tumbler before moving on to the next step. And then once that glitter is applied all over the tumbler, I clean up my little craft space, and then I take my weeding tool and then I remove those hearts. You can see those hearts a little bit through this like transparent vinyl, but having that blue paint on there really does make a difference. Now, me personally, I like to remove all of my vinyl pieces while my paint is still wet. But keep in mind that paint is wet, so with that weeding tool, if you accidentally scrape that tumbler, it's going to scrape wet paint. So I make sure to do this very slowly. I know I'm looking like I'm going really fast, but this is fast forward. Trust me, I'm moving slow as a snail. Really take your time with this and just remove those pieces very carefully. And whenever I use that weeding tool, I make sure to pick towards that vinyl piece and not towards my tumbler. So if my weeding tool does like scrape a little bit on my tumbler, it's scraping on that vinyl piece, and I don't care if I mess up that vinyl piece because it's vinyl and it's just going to get thrown away. So I do this while the paint is still wet. If you want to do this while the paint is still dry, you can do it while it's still dry. But the reason why I do this while the paint is still wet is because I feel like it gives it more of a crisp line whenever I remove that vinyl. Sometimes whenever you remove this vinyl when the paint is dry, especially if you let it dry like overnight, then sometimes that vinyl gets stuck to that paint, and then it doesn't like remove it to give it like that nice crisp design, and it kind of peels up sometimes. But you do you, whichever way you feel comfortable. There's really no wrong way, it's really just preference. And don't worry, if you happen to scrape your tumbler, take that adhesive again and place that on a small paintbrush and just blot around those areas that you may have scraped, and then just add the glitter right over that. It's really that easy just to do that like touch up glitter spots, and it just really comes together that way. So when I was finished with this step, I sprayed my tumbler with my Krylon Crystal Clear acrylic coating. I make sure to spray that all around the tumbler like 2 times to really make sure that I'm locking in those glitter areas. I didn't film that, but I will have that listed in my description below. I let that dry for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then I move on to epoxy. So again, the crystal clear acrylic coating, I'll have actually 2 listed in my description below, depending on which one you like. And I know a lot of people also use that clear spray paint as well. The reason for that is just you want that glitter to be locked in, so whenever we're epoxying like you see, that glitter stays and that glitter doesn't go on that red area and just make it look like a big fat mushy mess. So now you'll see that I'm adding my 20 milliliters of epoxy to my tumbler. Again, 20 milliliters of epoxy. I'm using 10 milliliters part A and 10 milliliters part B, totaling 20 milliliters of epoxy. I don't want to add too much epoxy to this because this is not going to be the last coat of epoxy I add to the tumbler. I don't want a really big bulky tumbler. I just want a nice smooth tumbler. So I make sure to let this tumbler cure for the full 24 hours before I move on to the next step with this tumbler. So I'll let this spin and then we'll see y'all then. All right, now my tumbler is completely cured. I first take my X-Acto knife and then I just X-Acto knife around the rim of that tumbler to remove any of that excess epoxy. And then I take a 220 grit sanding block and I sand very lightly around my tumbler. I really didn't need to sand too much, so I really didn't worry about getting rid of any bumps or anything before I add the decals to the tumbler. I decided to use a really light pink color for the outlines and then a red color for the love. So all I did was I took that design that I have on my Etsy shop in my description below, and then I just recut that out. I really wanted to use those silhouettes again, so I tried to place some of those around the tumbler, but I really didn't like that pink on pink. And then I really wanted to really save them, but I just realized I'm just gonna throw them away and just use the outlines. So I first removed all of the silhouettes or the inside designs of my hearts, and all we're going to be using for this is the outlines to place on the tumbler. And whenever you're placing hearts on a tumbler, especially the outlines or any outlined anything actually, make sure you are using transfer tape, because if you don't use the transfer tape, it will not lay flat on your tumbler, especially a round surface. I don't know why, it's science, just listen to me and use the transfer tape. So the good thing about using transfer tape is you can use that transfer tape like 5 to 10 times and you don't have to keep adding new transfer tape. So I always do it the long way. I just cut a small piece of transfer tape and I keep reusing that piece of transfer tape until it's not really sticky anymore, and then I cut a bigger piece of transfer tape to apply it to the bigger hearts. So for me personally, I only made 3 sizes of these hearts, and those are the 3 sizes that are on my design on Etsy. So if you want to make the hearts like 4 or 5 different sizes, go ahead and do that. But just remember that the more sizes you have, the harder it's going to be to really match up these outlines with the heart. So that's why I always keep it like up to 3 sizes, because in the long run, it's really easy to understand the difference between the really, really big heart, the medium heart, and then the small heart. And also, I really think it'd be really pretty if you added more than one color of the outline. So instead of having just this like pink color, you have like dark pink, you have maybe white. So just really just create these tumblers just however you want to create them and really have fun with them. And I'm sure no matter what you create, it's going to turn out beautiful. And then you'll see once I'm finished with applying those outlines to the tumbler, I'm then going to add my love decal, and I chose that red vinyl. I thought that went really well with that red peekaboo. So I'll stop talking now. See y'all soon. Bye. Okay, I'm back, guys. So now that my decals are placed on my tumbler, I'm going in with my CCDIY Quick Coat. This is a urethane sealer, and all you do is you apply a very small amount of this sealer on all of the decals that you place on your tumbler before you epoxy. What this does is this allows these decals to really be placed on your tumbler, so you don't have to worry about those decals lifting after you epoxy your tumbler. All you do is apply this and you let this dry for about 15 to 20 minutes before moving on to epoxying your tumbler. And once that sealer is dry, I'm going in with my epoxy. I'm using 2 coats of epoxy for this tumbler. So my first coat, which is what you see here, is 20 mLs of epoxy, 10 mLs part A and 10 mLs part B. I let that cure, and then I add my final coats of epoxy, which is 10 mLs of epoxy. That's 5 mLs part A and 5 mLs part B. I really wanted this tumbler to be nice and sealed, and I wanted it to be nice and smooth and not be bumpy. And if you need to sand between your coats of epoxy, that's completely fine. Go ahead and sand very lightly and then add that final coat of epoxy to your tumbler. And then once my final coat of epoxy is cured, I'm going to clean up the rim of my tumbler for the last time and then clean the inside of my tumbler. I then take my lid, apply that lid to the top of my tumbler, and then my tumbler is completely finished. So much glitter, so much sparkle. I absolutely love this tumbler. And if you guys did enjoy this video, please be sure to give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more tumbler and craft videos. And like I mentioned before, you can also find me on my socials, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. Thanks so much for watching, y'all, and I'll see y'all next time.